Welcome to the World Class Speaking podcast series. This is a place where you will learn how to present, persuade, and profit by improving your communication skills. Each episode in the series is a chapter from the book World Class Speaking in Action. And each chapter is written by a certified world class speaking coach. I'm your host, Matt Miller, and I've carefully crafted and summarized each chapter in the book. Have you ever been bored from a technical presentation with lots of charts, data, and statistics? If you answered yes to this question, you'll learn how to effectively present an exciting presentation, even if it's technical, throughout this episode. This is episode 14, Tell a Technical Tale, and the author of this specific chapter is Rob Goodyear. And Rob Goodyear is a certified world-class speaking coach, as well as a veteran speaker and coach on technology, who is also known as a geek who speaks. And this episode is very important because understanding how to effectively present a technical presentation is important to understand. That way, you don't lose or confuse your audience. If I was to summarize this whole episode in just a couple sentences, it would be this. When conducting a technical presentation, don't bore your audience with data, statistics, charts, graphs, etc. Tell a story and provide a visual to reinforce the message and further move your points. Because since birth, we've wanted to hear stories. And once we hear them, we remember them. And this is something directly out of the book. It said, I have never heard my 2-year-old granddaughter ask me, Papa, give me a PowerPoint presentation. That just doesn't happen. People pass down stories from one age to the next, and that's how we remember stuff from generations before us. Facts tell, but stories sell. And there's 3 different locations in your presentation to tell a story. The number 1 location to tell your story is at the opening. And you can open your presentation in a variety of ways, but you can start with a story, and within that story, you can make a big bang statement. It gets your audience's attention. You could also ask a question that directly correlates to that story. In addition to the beginning or open, you can also tell a story to illustrate a point. And we talked about this in previous episodes, but one of the best ways to make your points clear and remembered is by anchoring your point in a story. And you can use a story to illustrate a point, especially when showing technical data, because you want to show us what the data means, not the data itself. If you start running through numbers, charts, graphs, etc., you're going to lose the audience. But if you tell us what it means in an easy to understand fashion, you're going to set yourself up for success. Show an easy to understand visual, not a complex image, because being clear is better over being clever. And I learned this because I gave a Toastmasters speech, and Toastmasters is an association where you go and you give speeches in front of a live audience and you collect feedback. When I went to give a Toastmasters speech, I talked about the idea of compounding interest. And I also have an engineering background, and I got way too complicated with it. And I started talking about how, if you start with $100 and that $100 increases 10%, now you have $110. If that $110 increases 10%, you don't increase that wealth by 10 more dollars, but instead you increase it by $11 because you're not increasing it by 100, but 110. And you can see that compound effect. And then I started talking about how it's not linear. You don't get the same amount of money every single year, but instead it's exponential and you see your money expand over time. And I started getting into the details of what compounding interest actually is and the formula behind it. And I could tell that I lost my audience. So moving forward, when I talk about compounding interest, which I really like to talk about because it is very powerful, what I do is I show 2 charts. I show a chart that goes straight up, and I show a chart that's exponentially expands. And then I talk about how if you were to increase your money at the same amount every single year, your chart would look like this, or linear. And then if you take into consideration compounding interest, your chart will look like this, or exponential. And then I show after a certain amount of years that the exponential number is a lot higher than the linear number. And it's a lot easier when I show a graph. So that may have sounded technical just explaining that. But the point of that is when you're giving your audience a speech, you want to make sure that you, for lack of a better term, dumb it down, make it simple, make it easy to understand, because you don't know how familiar your audience is with these subjects. When I use that example, instead of talking about the numbers, just show a chart, and it makes it easier. And then the third place where you can tell a story is at the close. So you think about it, you can close with the story. However, you never want to close with a question and answer. Never close your presentation with a question and answer. It can be the second to last part, but not the last. Because remember, your last words linger, and there's too much risk ending with a poor question and answer session. You might be asked a unfair question from your audience that might cause you not to be able to respond to a certain question, that might make you look bad. There's too much risk involved because the last words out of your mouth will be remembered. So you can do the question answer, the second last thing, but when it comes to the last thing, telling a story would be more effective. And to expand on it, here's something that the book said. Before opening the presentation up to questions, I say something like this. I have one more story for you before I close. However, I'd first like to see if you have any questions on what we've talked about so far. And that tells the audience that you still have one more primary story that you're going to tell, and you're giving a certain amount of time dedicated towards questions because you have to move on to the story next. That would be an effective way to use a question and answer. To summarize, you don't want to bore your audience with data, statistics, charts, and graphs. Tell a story and provide a visual to reinforce the message and further move your points. Think about my example with the two charts I made, both linear and exponential. Tell us what the data means. Don't simply speak to numbers and trends. And just to piggyback off that last comment, if you were to have a bunch of data grouped into different categories, a simple to understand chart that a lot of people would understand is just a pie chart. You can break it up into a circle, and then depending on how big the slice of the circle is the percentage that falls into that category. Something like that would be easy to understand. But if you start showing different graphs, then it gets more complicated. And then lastly, never end with a question and answer session. You can make it your second to last thing, but don't make it your last thing. End with a story because your last words linger, and you want to leave your audience going out of that building with inspiration from the story that you just presented. And now that you know the benefits of telling a story, instead of dumping data and statistics on your audience for your next presentation, simplify your points and message by telling a story to illustrate a point. Tell us what the data means, not the numbers and trends, and focus on clarity over being clever. And that wraps up this episode. And in the next episode, you will learn how to leverage activities to engage your audience. That's all we've got for this episode on the World Class Speaking podcast series. Until next time, remember that becoming a great communicator is so important because it leads to greater impact, influence, and income. Thank you for listening and have a great day.